This is just not where you start the story, man. You don't even know how to start the damn freaking story. Okay. Okay, I'm so sorry for that. Now I will tell you the following, okay? I need to whisper. How do you actually start the story? Because here we have an author, right? Jacob Benrod is actually very good. He messaged me 23rd of January. I hope you're doing well. In my opinion, one of my biggest challenges is that I don't feel skilled enough to identify what I need to learn. I do the best I can, but I lack the knowledge to pinpoint areas for improvement. I want to point out, of course, for Jacob, areas that he can improve on. And basically, I have two areas that he can improve on. First of all, where do you actually start the story, right? Because I remember as I read the beginning and I finished the first chapter, and it struck me that ultimately the first chapter should have ultimately started somewhere around here. The first thing Soren noticed as he drifted in and out of consciousness was a muffled voice echoing in his ears, followed shortly by a faint scent of distant smoke lingering in the air. As his eyes creaked open, the blurriness from the attack still clogged Soren's vision. Okay, this is an incredible opening chapter and an opening paragraph if this is where the story actually opens. Instead, all of this, you see all of that blue, all of it, yep, all of that, all of that, all of that, all of these paragraphs, you see, if we go slower, yes, all of this is not where the story should have begun. The story should have begun here. Ultimately, because here's how the contrast goes. On the island of Skyhaven, floating far above the clouds and cloaked in neon mists, sat wood weavers, woodcrafts. Inside, it's basically a place for woodcrafts. Inside the carpentry shop, it's a carpentry shop, half a dozen drunken customers slurred songs around their meals. The earlier alarm at this island's plummet of several feet seemed forgotten in the warmth of the shop. Scents of sawdust mixed with fresh grilled fish and buttered grains. Sloppy meals spread on well-crafted wooden plates lay on a workbench in the back of the room, near a set of long-forgotten woodworking tools. Sitting atop the bench, absorbed in his task, was a young man scrubbing a stack of plates. Now, this is the protagonist, Soren, I believe. Soren, yes. So, this is not where you should begin the story. In other words, what is the identifying markers for starting the story? Certainly not this. Because imagine this, and then we contrast it with the first thing Soren noticed as he drifted in and out of consciousness. That's way better than whatever this is. We know this is way better. We know that the other one is way better. But why? That's because we don't care about any of this. There is no humanity here. There's nothing that interests us. There's nothing curious about it. If you want to start a story with world building, you can do it. However, I hope to God that this particular world building that you are starting with is actually very interesting, okay? Because on the island of Skyhaven, rather generic name, floating far above the clouds and cloaked in neon mists, sat a carpentry shop. Nothing is really that unique or interesting about this carpentry shop. This is also a typical stock fantasy floating island. It does have wolves, very, very big wolves and beasts, which is very interesting. But maybe you want to start with that, okay? Maybe you want to start there if you want to start with a bit of world building, okay? So this is the issue here that ultimately really kills this story. It absolutely crushes it. What is the identifying metric that you should always consider as to where you should begin the story? If you can begin the story in a point of character conflict, it's always the best. No matter how you spin it, even if you have a very good hook with world building, it's always better to start the story with character conflict. Yeah? So for example, if you start the story with someone that is ultimately, let's say, for instance, angry, yes, he was furious. Now, you could say he was furious is not particularly unique prose, but it doesn't have to be unique prose. If you are reading a book and you hear he was furious, sure, he was furious. Why is he furious though? Right. But if you hear this, in the island of Skyhaven, floating far above the clouds and cloaked in neon mists, this doesn't invoke any questions in the reader. This is just a description of a stock fantasy island in a stock where there's this young man in a stock carpentry shop with stock descriptions of customers. Stock. This is stock. You could get this, literally you could get ChatGPT to spit this out. But you cannot get ChatGPT to spit this out as the opening paragraph to a story unless you really guide it. Yes. And so the best place to start a story always is oftentimes the place with conflict, a place where there is some character conflict, something interesting. Or if you're going to start with world building, you should have a very interesting world building. I'm reading right now this book by V.E. Schwab, Darker Shade of Magic, and the opening paragraph in that story is just world building, much like this story here, exactly, much like this one here, but it is substantially superior because, the character has a very strange coat, a peculiar coat, and, we get to see why that coat is peculiar, right? And so that author, of course, is a published author, is a lot more professional, a lot more developed as a writer. They're able to literally begin the story with info dumping, but they're able to actually succeed with it. Okay? However, in here it doesn't work. This is really, really bad. His plan to use food to draw in customers had been a good one in theory, but in execution he found that more people in the slums of the South District needed dinner far more than they needed a rocking chair. Interesting. But to be honest with you, I am not hooked yet. There is no story here. There is no story here. Once upon a time, the bulk of the room had been a display area for his father's woodworking. This is not a story. There is no story in this paragraph. And it really keeps going. As the young man wiped dried appetizers off of a plate, a patron stumbled upon the top of his table and raised a glass. This guy is drunk, right? This guy is drunk. And he has to get this character off and out of the place. So Soren set down the plate he was working on and walked to the drunken man, helping him down from the table. This is the drunken man. Paulson swayed, struggling to stay on his feet, but maintained the giddiness in his voice as he spoke. And he gets attacked by these people. Fist cracked. He's examining the situation when effectively he gets attacked, and a lot of people run away, and he's knocked out. Yes, a lot of people run away. So as you can see here, the world faded to monotone shades of gray as 6 pairs of feet sprinted out of the door. Okay, so people dine and dash. Here we are introduced to the story, right? I would say, why don't you begin with here, and then just recap all of this. You can literally recap all of this. All of this can be simply just summarized in one paragraph. Literally, no more than one paragraph. And so we are hooked with the character, the struggle the character is going through, and so on and so forth. Right. So that's the first thing that I would say focus on. The second thing is something I noticed in the second chapter and in the first chapter. And it has to do with prose. Specifically, how many descriptions to have. First of all, as you can see, these chapters are not indented. This chapter is not indented. And in chapter 2, you seem to fix that mistake because you indent these chapters. These are indented chapters. Anyways, that's formatting. Talking about the craft of the story. Smoke whipped past Soren as he dashed through the streets of the West District, his heart pounding. Okay, I would even go as far as to make the argument. You could even start here, but I think the last point is also fine. But the first one you actually begin with is not very good. Beyond this, the amount of descriptions, right? There are very large wolves that attack beasts. And so the island gets really very hectic. Anyways, the acrid smell of burning wood and sounds of chaos filled the air. The glow of fires cast an eerie dancing light on the buildings, some already succumbing to the flames. Even at this distance, the flames' heat scorched his face, intense and unforgiving, but he pushed through. Near the outer edge of the West District, far from the source of the fires, the structural damage was minimal. That didn't stop the mass panic, though. And so, one thing that ultimately struck me is how there is unnecessary repeated descriptions, but also, so what does that mean? So for example, here, that didn't stop the mass panic though. A sea of citizens crashed toward shelter, disoriented and frenzied. Okay, so disoriented and frenzied communicate the same thing. This sentence also communicates the same thing. Here, for example, intense and unforgiving, but he pushed forth. So, for instance, here you can see the flames' heat scorched his face. Okay, I know that is intense and unforgiving, right? You know, there's no need for this. There's no need for this. This is already effective and it communicates everything you need. Many looked lost, confused, and or otherwise turned around. Same thing, communicating the same. Basically, this entire chunk is communicating the same thing. Now, that's fine if you try to communicate it in a different way. But the only way it's communicated with is the same. It's the repeated same language of descriptions, right? And so I don't want to come across myself as, repetitive. But yeah, there is a lot of repetitive prose. You can try to get that off. And also, you can also improve where to begin the story. And you should also always try to improve where to begin each chapter. I would say this chapter is very good in where it begins. This one, however, not very good. Yes. Anyhow, these are the things I've noticed about this story. If you took anything from this video, I do hope that you took a lot from this video. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.